What's up, everybody? Lefty here with Party Science. I am here with none other, the one and only Gregg
Wow.
Croteau. Did I say that?
You crushed the name.
Okay, awesome. But Greg, I know we're limited on time, so I'm going to get straight into the story that Juan Carlos shared with me.
Oh boy.
He goes, "You
Oh
were
boy.
so well prepared for this role when you first became a part of UTEC that on your first day you walked in with a notepad and pencil and went around
Ah.
to every kid and talked to them and made it a point to get to know them. Did you plan that? Like, how did you know that that was what you needed? Like, how did that come together for you?"
I appreciate Juan Carlos doing interview number one with you. That was great. So, and I appreciate the introduction. But hey, great to be here. Thanks for all your work you do in the community, and thanks for all the work you've done at UTEC. Right, I still remember all the kind of projects we did, in the DJ, and it's been great. And so, look forward to staying in touch. And so, yeah, no. So I've been at UTEC now for 25 years, and when I first started, actually Juan Carlos, who to this day continues to remind me, just in case I forget, was a part of the hiring team.
Yes.
I was not on his list for the final candidate. So thank you, Juan Carlos, for bearing with me. But yeah, when I was lucked out, and it's my dream job, right? 25 years ago, I was able to get interviewed by a group of young adults, Juan Carlos, Rachel Chandler, Peter Lovis. These were, individuals still engaged in UTEC. Were doing the work for years before that, along with Kathy Muldoon and Steve Perlswig, who were part of the Neighborhood Association. And they worked with a group of young adults, right? About 15, 20 young adults. To this day, I'm still in touch with a bunch of them. One of them, Marty Vasquez, Marty, what's up, is on our board alongside Juan Carlos. And, I was very fortunate to be able to kind of, gain the trust initially of that team. And, when I walked into UTEC, I was still learning on day one. I had done some youth work, in East Boston and Revere. I did my graduate work in Michigan. But when I came in, I think the biggest thing is I just wanted to make sure, I was learning and hearing from our young adults. So yeah, at that time, this dates back way before Facebook. Computers didn't exist, right? So I had a little red notebook, and that was what I relied on to make sure I could hear from young adults. And I think, that was, for me, the big thing, and wasn't just for me, it was us, right? We had, a great team, right? Where we all knew, like, we had to make sure we were listening to young adults because this was their dream, this was their hope, right? And to kind of be able to kind of get all their ideas and then over the years chip away at them. And so that was the approach back then. So that was Juan Carlos' story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, what was the first project that you took a hold of at UTEC that you were like, you really saw that you created the effect that you were looking for? Do you remember what that was, or?
The first project, so it was interesting because myself, again, I really wanted to make sure we were hearing from our team, right? And our team was the young adults who were there in the very beginning and some of our initial staff and partners. And I think it was very clear from the beginning that we wanted to address, making sure we had a drop-in component, right? Where young adults could feel comfortable just coming in, safe from any of the gang stuff going on. And we knew that we also needed to address some of the challenges out in the community, particularly in terms of gang conflicts. And at that time, even before UTEC started, Lowell, you had, Southeast Asian gangs versus Latino gangs, right? And it was really driven by, kind of ethnic tension there. And so I think from the beginning, we really wanted to make sure we were doing the work out in the community to look at peacemaking and what's possible there. And so I'd say one of the highlights in the early years was, one of our values at UTEC is this idea of just chipping away. And that came from the street workers, right? It came from the idea that, we know this isn't just like we're going to open our door and everyone's just going to come in and everything's going to be perfect, right? Like we know that we got to make sure we're chipping away and extending the invite. And the answer might be no a number of times. But over time, we know what the answer could be. And I think one of the highlights early on was getting, doing the work with two different groups of young adults and different gang sets and getting their agreement to do a peacemaking summit. And the summit was cake. At that point, the biggest thing was, being able to get, see the work that was happening by our team and the young adults themselves to be open for like what might be different, right? And getting that agreement to go away with, at the time, your rivals was pretty significant. And I've said this before, like we actually, there was a number of different steps we did, but then getting the groups to get on board with going away for a summit together was huge. And we chose a location like 6 hours away, northern Maine. I don't think any one of us had been up there, and by far the quietest van ride in the history of van. Was like demarcation line between like rows 3 and 4, like, and so. But then when we got up there, like that was the magic, that happened over time, and I think that work. We talk about, because it's also like it shows what's possible, right? And we're still chipping away. 25 years later, we're still chipping away, trying to, continue to be better, continue to learn, and then also learn like what worked for us over the years. And so those, and I'm still close with a number of folks who were engaged in that work, and who now, 25 years later, guys that were maybe on the opposite rows of that van are now talking to each other, right? And it's like, no surprise, the work that happens there. So, yeah.
Right. What were you thinking that van ride up as you're sitting in that silence? Like, what is going through your mind?
Oh, I think we were thinking this was expected, right? I mean, this was exactly what we expected. And I think, we always say, like, it makes sense for folks to have some healthy distrust, right? When you walk into UTEC, we don't expect that, like, oh, everything's going to be like, young adults, unfortunately, in some cases, and too often, many cases, been let down by different folks, right? In a variety of different institutions or, networks and so forth. And so I think we have to know that, like, yeah, it's going to take time. And so I think, yeah, that kind of was expected. And then it was just like, that's where, our youth work comes in, right? We got to break the ice. And I think, we had a great team to be able to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
What was it like building your team as you were putting this together? Like, what was it like getting the first employee that you saw get hired? What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think. It's, I think back then, the field was different, right? So the field today, I think street work is recognized, right, as a particular field, right? And when you're thinking about youth violence and you're thinking about, like, community improvement work, street work, police, schools, ideally there's a network of positions. Back then, street workers were not like widely recognized. And so I think when we were thinking about building our team, we had to do some education around what we were trying to do, right? And yeah, no, we lucked out. We just had, folks that were really like super interested in wanting to, like, be involved in something new, be involved in like giving back to the community, and also being involved in kind of, knowing some of their own lived experiences that were, oftentimes very similar to our young adults, how they could use that in a good way. And so, yeah, I'm trying to remember. I don't think we didn't have like recruiters. We didn't have online job postings. So a lot of that was really word of mouth, which ended up, looking back on it, like that was exactly the way we would have wanted that to happen. So everybody was really kind of embedded in the community for the most part.
Right. So it was always in-house that it was almost coming from, because it was someone that was a part of what you were already doing.
Yeah, in the beginning years, yeah. And then obviously, evolved, and we had different positions and that changed. But in the beginning years, a lot of folks were really kind of like involved in the work here. And at that time, it was very, it was focused on Lowell, right? So now, probably about 15 years into it, give or take, we then, started doing work in Lawrence, because we had a lot of young adults, in Lowell, but kind of house hopping, right? So one night you might be in Lowell, one night you might be in Lawrence. And it just didn't make sense to be like, all right, we're not going to serve you if this week you're in Lawrence versus Lowell. And so we kind of knew that we had to kind of make that extension. And then about 6 or 7 years ago, because Lawrence, there's a lot of back and forth, similarly with Haverhill, now we're in Haverhill as well. But in the beginning years, it was really focused in Lowell.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, how did you go about expanding it to another city? Like, what was that process like for you?
It kind of happened organically. Like, there wasn't like a, 2-year strategic plan. I think it really came from, again, that need that we were seeing and kind of the practicality of it. And then knowing that we had, a lot of, just good support in the community, right? We wouldn't be doing the work if we knew that, we didn't have the community kind of buying in and interest. And so there was interest in making sure that we could provide some services in Lawrence. And, we were really careful to just say we're not going to, take it step by step as opposed to like doing a full replication model. But we kind of gradually now, like 10 years later, we have our mattress recycling facility is in Lawrence. We have a program support center on Marston Street. And we're seeing more young adults from Lawrence than ever. And so it's been great to have. We have a street worker team that's dedicated to Lawrence and building those relationships.
Nice.
Yeah.
Now, you've been doing this for 25 years now? 25 is what you guys just hit, right?
Yeah, 25. Look at that. Perfect timing with the shirt.
Yeah.
So we had our gala last year. It's been a little over 25 years.
Yeah. How do you, looking at the progress you've had, what do you think the one lesson you've learned that's kind of stayed true through all of these years has been?
The one lesson that stayed true. I think this work, there's probably many lessons. I'd say one of them is that the work's ongoing, right? Like there's no, I would love to believe there's a finish line that says, okay, we're done, check. But I think the one consistent thing is making sure that UTEC is a place for continual learning, right? Like over the years, we've had challenges. We've had successes, and I think it's important never to get too high, never get too low, right? And know, we're on a journey, right? And I think that's been, for me, like one of the consistent things is knowing that this work is going to be ongoing. We're always going to be learning, right? We're always going to be, and I think, importantly, we always have to make sure we're equipped to be able to say, look, we're learning every day. 25 years later, we have organizations, across the country looking to us, and that's great. But it's really great also because we continue to learn through that process as well. And I think that's a big thing. I hope will continue for the next 25 years as well.
Right.
Can I take a pause 1 second?
Yeah. Do you think? You're good.
I need water.
Yeah.
I'm gonna cough. Have a coughing fit. Okay.
Yeah. So, what keeps you up at night now? Is it the thought of how does this continue? Is it what's in store for you? Like, what keeps you, you've done so much, you've created so much opportunity and helped so many people, but there's always something that keeps our gears kind of like hungry for more.
Yeah.
What is it? What's that for you?
What keeps me up at night? I don't sleep a ton, and that's a good thing, I guess. But I think that not out of concern, but I think what keeps what's kind of my focus now is really making sure that we have good, healthy kind of transition leadership moving forward, right? So a little while ago, I shared with our team that I wanted to take a step back, and we wanted to open up. To have a new CEO come in. So after 25 years, making sure we have a new CEO, I would then kind of shift to executive chair role, which is basically a way for me to still contribute to UTEC through doing mostly external work, fundraising, policy. And I think my biggest focus now is on that transition. We're getting, I think we've done great work even over the past year with our leadership team, super, super proud of our team. We've expanded our leadership team intentionally. So the next person coming in, the job is, hopefully a bit more manageable, right? And we've had, the ability to kind of do that. So my focus is really on that. I think it's healthy for the organization. For myself, that my number one thing is just being able to have more time with family. And so, for me, I'm excited about that role. And I'm excited about it for UTEC. It's, I think, the right time to be doing that. So we've been working on that, spending a lot of time on that. And I think the other big thing that's always going to be present is just making sure we have the resources, right, that we can commit in a sustainable way, right? That we know we're not looking just at this year's budget, but we're looking at next year's budget, right? Because any commitment we make, we want to make sure we can stay true to it, beyond that. And I think attached to that is the resources we need to carry out the programming in the way that we know we really are able to do. And so I think being, focused on making sure young people's voice is at the center of everything that we're doing, for me, that's still like the number one top priority. And just making sure that that's always like front and center for us. And super proud of our team for continuing that. 25 years later, we talk about this the idea as an organization, we're kind of like a hybrid, right? We're a larger organization now than we were before, but how to still maintain some of those, the grassroots, the values that drive the work, but within, the framework of the budget that we have, and that we have, nearly, 100 staff now as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So for yourself, as you look to kind of step away from the position and you look for someone else to fill in, what do you think is the key component for that person for you to be like, yes, this is the one?
We're doing a lot of talk around that, and there'll be another, job kind of posting coming out on this, and I expect what you would see from that is someone who genuinely is centering young adults in all that they're doing. Somebody who's like a humble learner, right? Because there's a number of things in this role, and it's not just the CEO, it's a leadership team in general, right? You're doing everything from policy work to building development to programming to, making sure you're supporting the financial, the fundraising side of things. So there's a really broad spectrum. So we can't expect anybody to come in here and say, okay, nor would we want. The person that comes in and says, I'm a 10 out of 10 in all these areas, and I know mattress recycling, and everything. We really want to make sure we have someone who's a humble learner, who's got the, really good follow through and can pick up things. And again, you got a great team, right? That's the exciting part of this. I think this position is you got an amazing team that's by your side. And again, I'll be able to kind of support that person too, moving forward in some of those external areas. But I think making sure that as an organization, we continue to stay focused on centering young adults, I'd say by far is probably the top issue.
Right. Now for yourself, you're looking to step back into still fundraising for the program itself, but less of that hands-on. Basically everything that you just named that they need to cover.
Yeah.
For you, you're looking to be like, all right, everybody.
Yeah.
We got the one. I'm slowly going to teach them, guide them, and then in X amount of time, I'm going to walk away. What do you think that's going to feel like to you?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, we're expecting someone to walk in, and really, like, they can use me as a resource, but, they're going to be the CEO, right? And so I'm not going to necessarily be, kind of coaching them per se, but I'll be available to help in the relationships we've built along the way, being able to intentionally, make sure those are continuing, right? The relationships we have with a variety of different institutions. Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, this is, I would say I'm very fortunate. I got a job that I've loved and continue to love 25 years later. And it's different now than it was. Like in the beginning, there's one Carlos story. I was doing direct youth work every single day. And it's a bit different now, right? I have to obviously manage a number of different areas, but I still am very proud that hopefully one of my titles is youth worker, and so I still have that. So I think I still think that the idea of having someone come in here it's exactly what I want to make sure. Like we all know, like at some point in time, it's healthy for the organization, right, to have that. So I'm excited by that. I'm sure there'll be challenges along the way, but I think because we have a really, really solid team. I feel really good about it.
Nice. Now, as we're getting close to wrapping up here, what made you get into this line of work? Like, how did that happen?
Lawrence. So I tried a number of different things. This was early on, like, high school, college. One summer, I thought I was going to be a stockbroker. That didn't work out exactly. It was good, right? Because every summer I was like, I had an idea. And I was, motivated to try to, figure out a scenario and get an internship or a summer job. And another summer was architecture. That was great. And now, through UTEC, I get to, play some of those scenarios and some of the building work we've done. But one summer I had the idea of basically like doing a summer job working with young adults. And I was in college and loved it. I mean, the primary ingredient for me was it just felt like when I was thinking about what I'd be doing, it just felt natural, right? It felt like I could be myself. And And then as you do this work, I think like the motivation I had early on and the motivation I still have today kind of evolves, right? And so, I think a big part of, what I've been able to do, and this idea of like, talk about like taking chance out of the equation, right? So, I was very fortunate to be adopted by my parents early on. It was like 6 months old, and it was never, that was never a huge motivation, right? When I was first starting UTEC, and now, looking back on it, I think about, all right, my dad passed away early on when I was 21, right? A very small family, but my mom and my grandma and my aunt, they were there, right, from day one, and that was by chance. I lucked out, all right? I lucked out, and I think about the work that we do as like a community here, and that's like our young adults, our staff, our partners, right? Ultimately, ideally, it's to help make sure like we take chance out of the equation, right, for our young adults. And I think that's a big motivation, for me. And now, 25 years later, when we were first starting, and we were fighting, kind of, on a daily basis to make sure we were educating why this work is important, and we were learning because we made plenty of mistakes, right? And I think about today, 25 years later, and I think one of the motivations is the learnings we've had, and maybe the relationships we have now. How do we best kind of position the work moving forward, right? The any voice that we have, how do we make sure that that is helping drive the work moving forward? Because, some folks will compliment UTEC and say, "Oh, UTEC is different," and I understand where that's coming from, and we appreciate the compliment. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we don't want UTEC to be different, right? Ideally, we're not looking to replicate UTEC in other communities, but we hope we're providing you can see the vision for why every community should have a UTEC, and how it should be seen as essential, just like the other things we think are essential, right, in schools and police and firefighting. And I think that's part of the motivation that, I still have moving forward as well.
Right. Out of curiosity, just because I'm familiar with the situation similar to yours, did you know you were adopted, or how did you find out? What was that like for you?
Yeah, no, my parents told me as early as I can remember. I don't know, it was
Okay.
like 8 or 7. I can't remember, but
Okay.
they very upfront, and that was kind of just something that it wasn't until more recently that I started really looking into that.
All right.
Yeah.
Now, you don't feel that that was a key motivator, but you feel like that definitely played something into why you wanted to give back, is because you felt you lucked out in terms of being able to get adopted at, what did you say, 6 months?
6 months. Yeah.
6 months. So
Yeah.
at such a young age, you felt
Yeah.
like that was just a blessing in its way. In its
Oh
own.
yeah. No, I mean, again, my mom's my mom, and my dad, and I, like I said, I mean, I just think now I wasn't necessarily thinking about that, when I was starting UTEC, 25 years ago. But I think when I look back on it now, like in just more recently, yeah, I think like sometimes your motivations come up naturally, right? And I think like that happened for me that way. I was like, no, this is now that I really kind of think about it. Yeah, I was really lucked out by that. And how do we make sure that every young adult, gets that same opportunity?
Right.
Yeah.
So my last question to you here as we finish up is, what advice would you give to your younger self? And then what advice do you think your future self would give you?
What advice would I give to my
Your younger self? And what advice would a future version of you give you now?
Oh, wow. Lawrence, bring it home with the tough ones. I'm already like, my voice is already like, for the record, for folks at home, I may sound a little different because I'm, hopefully I'm not infected.
No, you're under the weather. I get it.
Yeah.
We got some table distance between
Yeah.
us, but we're okay. I'm fine either way. But yes.
Younger advice to younger self. I mean, I guess one thing I would probably say is that, you can never expect, all the curveballs that might be thrown your way, right? And just, you know, a lot of times you kind of, stick to your gut, right? And you usually, I would hope, that's a big, driver for success. And I think one of the things that I've kind of learned at UTEC is this work, there's all sorts of different approaches you can take. But hopefully the one that I think rings true is like just being your authentic self, right? And whatever that is. And I think, whether it's staff, whether it's young adults, just kind of leaning into like you and being you and your own authentic self, I think is a huge ingredient for success, right? Along with a lot of I mean, to be honest, I've been fortunate. We have, UTEC is really kind of values driven, right? And so, we have these values that drive our work. And I think back, if I can give my younger self, it'd be, taking to heed a lot of the values that drive our work here, right? And making sure that we are providing a clean slate, right, to folks, and always kind of chipping away. I think about that. And I think so my future self would give me?
Right.
That's a good question. Probably, enjoy it, right? The next steps, right? Like enjoy, and being able to, still be able to be a part of, supporting UTEC and doing that, but also just taking the time to enjoy family and taking the time to kind of, just kind of be in the moment, right? And so I'd probably say that might be what, the future Gregg might say as well.
Right. Okay, so we have reached our end here, sir. My question to you is just one last is, how could someone get in contact with UTEC if they're looking for your services or want to be a part of your cause?
Yeah.
What would be the best way to reach you?
Email Croteau, GCROTEAU @utecinc.org, or just go on our website, utecinc.org. And yeah, definitely anyone who's interested in learning a little bit more about UTEC, if you know someone that might want to work here, we're hiring a number of different roles. And for anybody that could benefit from our services, just reach out to us, and our team will be in touch.
Cool.
So, yeah, Lawrence, thank you.
You're welcome.
This is
Gregg.
fun. Yeah.
Thank you so much. All right, everybody. Gregg, UTEC. I'll put all his social media info on the video. Other than that, have a good one. Peace. That's it.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, bro.
Yeah. Thank you.